And one of the things I'm going to do today is actually talk to you and also get some interaction from you out there as well. So you're not going to sit there and fall asleep now, but I'm going to ask questions as well as this talk progresses. This is a sign that actually probably could hang over most businesses as you enter the door, and I'll explain why in a short moment. Okay, can I have a vote of hands, please? How many of you here actually know what the term firewater is? I saw one finger move over for the gentleman on the right. Anyone else? There's a half hand there. Okay. Don't be embarrassed, it's quite true. In actual surveys conducted at a number of environmental events, most people embarrassingly wish to think that firewater is something that Red Indians drink in cowboy films. In reality, of course, it's not. Firewater is the runoff from a fire. It's the cocktail of burnt combustible materials, oils, chemicals, firewater, which is the actual firefighting foam, mixed together, which can run off the site. And most people believe that that is actually the responsibility of the fire service to contain. And astonishingly, isn't. Believe it or not, over the many years, the environment agencies and the fire service have attended many incidents where firewater hasn't been contained because people simply don't believe it's their responsibility. And there's figures up here which you can look at later on, but it's approximately 4,500 cases of major firewater incidents since 2001-2009, where they weren't contained and consequently some serious environmental damage has arisen. Right at the beginning I mentioned the risk to business continuity through ineffective firewater containment. The issue is that under the legislation, businesses are actually compelled by law to contain firewater. Failure to do so can mean your company is actually uninsured, and also the consequential costs and damages that arise from a firewater incident will fall upon your company's coffers, and it can lead to business closures. So, just take an example. Approximately 500,000 litres of water per hour were used to extinguish the fires at Buncefield. A massive problem. And to this day, there's 250,000 litres of toxic firewater stored somewhere in and around the Buncefield area, which have to be disposed of. The issue we face is that, of course, that under all the legislation, ignorance is no defence. I actually point the finger, though, back towards, I should say, government, for the lack of information dissemination, because that is a big problem. As you've identified correctly here, virtually nobody here present actually knows that firewater, or what it is. Further, if you run a business, you probably didn't realise you had an obligation to contain it. And it is a major problem. And it's actually something that's ended up with me speaking in Parliament, or in the House, and also lobbying the Environment Agency and speaking at their conferences about this particular subject. I'm going to click through some of these. It's just an example. About 99% of homeowners they know roughly that it's regulations about building. If you want to build onto a house, you know you've got to get planning permission. You know approximately that you can't just build what you like and how you want to do it. However, again, if I raise the question back to you all, how many of you are aware of this document's called PPGs? Again, the same gentleman, 2 or 3 of you. It's getting better. Okay. When I spoke at last year's annual general conference for the Environment Agency, they actually told me that only 4,000 PPGs were downloaded from their website out of 5.5 million businesses, which shows chronic ignorance. And when you consider there's approximately 30 different PPGs, the time you divide that down, it is an astonishingly low number. One of the other facts, of course, is you've got 5,000 registered coma sites in the UK who are obliged to download these documents every year. And it just shows that not even they are doing their job. So we're suffering from quite a serious problem in the UK. And I'm going to skip past some case studies, just to put up a slide right at the end about education. One of the things we believe is lacking in this country, and I think it bears true here today, is that ignorance is rife. Not the fault of the audience present, but unfortunately from those that should be disseminating the information. And unfortunately, the perception given by industry in general is the Environment Agency, and this is not an attack on the Environment Agency, is if unfortunately a police force are out there issuing speeding tickets, as an analogy, without there being speed limits posted on roads. And if I could move back my slide, it's not going page up. Okay. One example here is actually quite a serious example of the consequential losses that arose to this particular company. In 2010, this Grosvenor Chemicals, 150 firefighters, 25 fire engines to put out a fire. The consequential damage was horrendous to the environment. The environmental impact was absolutely huge. The fire service, of course, cannot contain firewater if no provisions have been made. If I skip to the end of this, the important bottom line was it cost the company £6 million through the lack of firewater containment. £300,000 of that cost was just that of the Environment Agency, their staff, their enforcement officers, and the health and safety people visiting and attending the incident. So what can be done to minimise this? If you were to download the PPGs, you'll find there is guidelines specifying what should be done. And products such as pollution containment valves can be fitted to the outflows of sites. However, there is a process that needs to be followed, and that is one of working out the risk on your site. Most people would say their site has minimal risk. However, you need to look at what you actually do on your industrial site. And I say industrial very loosely. A warehouse, for example, is a classic example. You could be a distribution company handling parcels from third parties. You don't actually know what is in those parcels. They could be stacked to the ceiling in a building of this size. If you had a fire in that building, you don't know what's going to burn. You don't know what the combustible byproducts of that are. The rule of thumb is, if you don't know what it is, you have to contain the firewater. So the only way to do it is to stop firewater escaping from your site. And the way to do that is to calculate the volume of water, or estimate the volume of water that would be used to extinguish that particular fire. And then to install some sort of dam or barrier to contain that. The simplest way to do it is actually to utilise what is there already. And that's the lowest cost way. Is to look at the volume of the drains. And the drains are your weakest and strongest link of defence on your site. If you don't have any, if you don't look after your drains will happily discharge your firewater straight into the local river. On the converse, if you look at your drains and you find your drains have sufficient capacity, if you were to block them off during an incident, you could actually contain the firewater within them. So it's a matter of, first of all, assessing your site for risks, which will arise from what you store and the likelihood of a fire. Secondly, looking at the potential volumes of firewater generated, which you can estimate based on the amount of materials that are flammable kept on your site, or if you have a sprinkler system, the rate of flow from that system. And thirdly, where will the firewater go? Remembering, of course, gravity will take effect, and it will take the path to the drains. I mentioned the drains, then if you can calculate the volume of the drains, look at the potential for containing the firewater then within the drains. And on most occasions, you'll find they can be quite adequate for medium-sized fires. Obviously, if you don't actually close off the outflow from the drains, then there is no point. Hence, you need to fit some sort of valve. A lot of sites will have penstock valves. These can be automated, because what is important, in the event of a fire, the valve is closed automatically. As a company, we manufacture firewater containment valves, which are retrofittable. But I'm not saying you have to use our particular technology. The important thing is you have to have a system which will convert that drain into a containment vessel, effectively, a firewater containment system. If you find the drainage capacity on its own accord is not sufficient, that can be increased by building bund walls. So you can have a small bund behind the drain, which means that the volume is increased. So what we're saying is really prevention is possible, prevention is not possible to prevent a fire necessarily, but the mitigation of its effects can be affected by the use of the drains. What we're also saying is that there is a tremendous level of ignorance within industry about the fact that there is an obligation to do something about containing firewater, and it is not at all the fire brigade's responsibility to do so. If you want your building to be burnt to the ground, have a fire on a site which is adjacent to a river or an area of special scientific interest. The fire brigade will now conduct risk assessments on your site and the consequences of the runoff from your site. If they deem it such that the risk to the environment is greater from the firewater than the burning building itself, they'll happily let it burn in a controlled fire fashion. That is one way to lose your business entirely, not to have firewater containment. So the fire brigade, because of their obligation to do what's best for the environment, will let your building burn to the ground or will extinguish your fire. If you don't have firewater containment, the likelihood is they will let it burn, again depending on your location. So really, we're back to this same old thing, education. Assessments, risk assessments, and the education process and problem stems right the way to environmental consultants. We interviewed only a year ago a group of environmental consultants who were conducting environmental management surveys around sites, only to find to our horror that again the same story was true. 75% of them weren't including any firewater risk assessment within their environmental audits. This is quite shocking, which meant their clients were left exposed, but actually worse from the perspective of the environmental auditors, they could probably be exposed to liabilities for the fact they missed that particularly important subject. So all we're saying is, at the end of the day, education is paramount. Understanding what is required is not difficult, it's actually common sense, but it's knowing where to look. And the best source of information is actually from the Environment Agency's website itself, or there are 2, 3 free to subscribe to e-newsletters which we publish in our strive to educate, which have actually been endorsed by the Environment Agency as useful tools, and you're more than welcome to subscribe to these free of charge. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.